And welcome. Good. Hello, Father. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing great. Just got the flibbity gibbets. These new microphones. Look at this. They're new. They're blue. They're new and blue,
New and blue and
and
in your face.
they're literally all three. So but we are happy. Thank you, John, for getting us
Right.
better microphones. These are more professional. They are blue for Our Lady. We were able to choose colors, so we
Oh, of
unanimously
course. Well, see, I'm
yes.
colorblind. That I would
Oh,
have
I
not
didn't.
would
So
have made
blue is
that
not.
connection.
You don't see
I
blue.
can see blue, but I don't ever really say, "Oh, look, blue."
Because it's really all you
Yeah,
see.
because I mean it blends in with other
Gotcha.
colors. I can see color. I mean, I tell people I see color. I have a hard time distinguishing certain shades
Sure.
of colors from others.
But these are a deep blue. And so here we go. We're firing away here with our new microphones.
Well, and our apologies for no podcast last week, and there's a reason that we did not have the podcast, and the reason we have these microphones now.
That's right.
So we had a scintillating discussion last week. I mean, we
Uh-huh.
solved the mysteries of the universe
We did it.
and
And
riveting, and there was no sound.
that's all right.
All,
There
we,
is
all, all,
today.
all you could see on the video were lips moving, or as I like to call it, preaching. Just
Yes.
kidding.
Yeah. Let's move. I can be the case candidate. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
that's right.
so
Well,
we are
okay, so
circling back
yeah,
today
we'll circle
on
back, but I have to ask. All right, it's week 4 of Lent. How's it going?
I'm doing pretty well. Doing pretty well. Still almsing,
Are you still almsing?
abstaining and Lexio and
Mhm.
monetary giving and spirit funding and just a little bit here and there, just trying to
Yeah, I mean,
stay
we're getting
focused.
I'm starting to see the finish line for Lent. It's
Probably going to
it's getting there.
relax on the Feast of Saint Joseph since that's a solemnity. So,
Yeah, that's true.
and
You
that's a
can break
big
the
deal.
fast then, couldn't you?
Are you sure? I mean, I wonder about that. It's really personal penances, and unless you're directly vowing or promising, I think it's
Well,
just kind of
correct.
the spiritual. I mean, obviously, one can spiritually look at, am I really being faithful, or is this just a wash, if it's every other day and just 3 weeks of Lent and more than half you've been, well, maybe now, or how about just one
Yeah.
more, how about one more relaxed day? Yeah,
Hmm.
then I think you're missing the point. But it is up to the individual. And
Sure.
so then we have the wine and cheese gathering after the Shakespeare play this weekend, Saturday evening, which is technically Sunday. So I'll enjoy wine with the
Oh,
people
well,
there
sure. I
because
mean, a
we're
special
doing
church
our
occasion.
1942 fund, which is establishing an annual fund for our school, which is
Hmm.
wonderful. 1942, of course, is when it was founded by the pastor. I think it was Alphonse Buss, a Benedictine priest, and with some parish families that started the school down the street in a little house in 1942, which we know was a difficult year, World War II, and all kinds of um, difficulties in the world. And our parish opened a little school. So, and here we are 82 years later.
Yeah, it's always a testament of the people's faith. I know I served at the church. They established the church the year after the stock market crashed,
Wow.
and they still built the church. And it was a
Hmm.
testament of faith,
There you go.
And of course, it shows you that there's never a non-difficult time
Right.
ever. And I always laugh when I read the homilies from, remember a couple weeks ago we were quoting St. John Chrysostom when he was just beating us up over giving.
Yes.
And,
Right. Yeah.
you can read some of the homilies of these guys who preached St. Augustine, 500s. He was like, this is the worst generation of all time. This is the most corrupt, foul generation ever, And I think every generation says that about itself.
Right. Sure. Right. This is
It's
the
never gotten any worse than this.
Well, I'm into Dickens now. The Tale of Two Cities, of course, his
Oh, that's
famous
a great
opener. It was the best of times.
The
Here is
worst
the
of
worst of
time.
times,
That's a
which
great,
is
I read that leisurely once and I could appreciate it a lot more. Dickens is difficult, but when I read Dickens, every character in his novels matter.
hmm
And so I don't have great reading comprehension. So sometimes the character I read from chapter 1 will appear in the chapter 300 because his books are all long. I'm like, I can't remember who this was, but
right.
it all fits in. It's just a work of genius.
Well, I'll remember that as I trudge
Yeah, make
through
sure
the
you
Tale of
keep
Two
in mind
Cities. Yep.
everybody has a part to play in the plot. So anyway, let's get into the main point today. And it's been in the news for the last few weeks. I thought we would talk about that, and that's in vitro fertilization from the Catholic standpoint. And there was a big kind of an upheaval in the state of Alabama when they passed some legislation to ban IVF because they considered the embryos human beings. And with presumptive the presumptive presidential candidate for the Republican Party, Donald Trump, uh, then rejected that vote and said he did support IVF. So I thought, well, let's have a little conversation about that. What does the church teach on IVF, and why does this matter? So what I have a couple of articles. One of them comes from the USCCB website, the United Conference of Catholic Bishops, and all you have to do is just Google IVF, and it'll come right there. And this was written some time ago. Some of the numbers,
It
especially
was
regarding cost, may be a little
the
outdated.
80s, was it?
What's
Late
that?
80s?
No, I think it was in the '90s
Okay.
when this was published. And then just this week, the National Catholic Register, which is a popular website, they also issued an article about IVF. And here's what they said. I'll just read the paragraph and then we'll get into the
Sure.
heart of it. It says that, so this is recent. An Alabama Supreme Court ruling that recognized the personhood of embryonic life sparked a nationwide debate about in vitro fertilization. But some people might be unaware that the industry's death toll for preborn life, meaning IVF, is likely higher than that of abortion.
Wow. But I could see why when
Yes.
we begin to understand what IVF is.
Yeah, so the CDC estimates that more than 238,000 patients attempted IVF in 2021. If clinics created between 7 and 8 embryos for every patient, and that's about the norm, that would yield about 1.6 million to 1.9 million over a year. Despite these high numbers, fewer than 100,000 embryos were brought to term, which suggests that somewhere between 1.5 million and 1.8 million embryos created through IVF were never born.
Wow.
So that's, and there may be some other things. So to help us frame this, Father, I will confess to you that there was a time when I would not have put all this together.
Sure.
I know that the church's position on abortion is very clear. IVF is not something I really would have thought about. Now I am thinking about it. Kind of frame this for us. Why is the church opposed to IVF?
Because of the dignity of every human person that begins at conception. So what happens with IVF is the conception isn't happening inside the womb. The manner of which obtaining uh, the the semen from the male, of course, is always going to break the sixth commandment, and it's outside of marriage, outside the marital act. Uh, and the union of the sperm and the egg happen in, I suppose, a petri dish test tube
Yeah.
scientific procedure, and and then several eggs are fertilized by, we don't even know if it would be the same male donor. Uh, so you're creating many embryos, which means that's a human person. And so then there's selection going on. Well, which ones are going to be likely to be the most viable?
Hmm.
And then you terminate the others or freeze. I don't if that's
Some of
still
them are
occurring.
frozen.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's another hot debate that seems to go on with what happens with these lives if women couples are infertile, sterile, and that's a painful reality with many married couples, which is why IVF becomes um, a masked solution.
Sure.
But it's not a solution. Of course, it's the desire is why we want to have children, and so um, that's really the problem is that you're going to select embryos that are not going to make it, and then they terminate them.
Help us then frame there is fertility and then there is in vitro fertilization. So the church is not anti-fertility.
Of course not.
And of course, the article on USCCB website, I mean, begins by talking about how infertility is a problem and it can be a tragic problem for some families.
Well,
For
even
marriage.
deeper than that is it really can be a scourge within the marriage. The couples that cannot have children that are married suffer tremendously, or the couples that continue to try to bring a child to term suffer miscarriage after miscarriage. So
But this is biblical. I mean,
yeah, but
this
then
is
you say biblical couples in the Jewish culture was seen as the barrenness of the woman was seen as God's punishment. You
as
must
a
have
form.
done something wrong, so there's a public affliction.
Right. I mean, the article does mention Elkanah, who says to his wife, who was unable to conceive, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Of course, Elkanah's wife loved him, but she wanted to bear a child. That's Hannah. Such stories in the Bible are Sarah, the wife of Abraham, who was barren until older age. We've already mentioned Hannah, and then there's she becomes the mother to the prophet Samuel. Then there's Elizabeth, who was the mother of John the Baptist, who was
Hmm.
barren for
Hmm.
most of her
Hmm.
life. So that was an affliction, and the Bible does speak to that, and for a number of reasons. I mean, in Judaism, of course, the Israeli people depended on the propagation of their people,
Right.
and plus there was also the understanding that a barren woman could not give birth to the Messiah,
Hmm.
which would have been the great blessing to give birth to the Messiah. So we recognize this, but then there's in vitro fertilization. And what the article goes on to say, and I thought it was very clear, and it does cite another magisterial text, Donum Vitae.
Okay.
And the fundamental principle the church uses to assess the morality of various means of overcoming infertility is a simple one, even if its application is sometimes difficult. Donum Vitae teaches that if a given medical intervention helps or assists the marriage act to achieve pregnancy, it may be considered moral. If the intervention replaces the marriage act in order to engender life, it is not moral. And so it really comes down for the Catholic faith and Catholic teaching to the conjugal act itself. That all that conception must happen within the act of the marriage bed itself.
Right. And with union of spouses, you can't have conception outside the union of spouses, and that's and the union of spouses, of course, is only happening in the context of the covenant of holy matrimony,
Hmm.
which is the union of a man and a woman that's indissoluble and meant to bring forth children. Now, the command of the Lord to be fruitful, multiply, given to Adam and Eve, of course, rings loudly in the marriage vows. But what happens, right? What happens with um, their openness to life, which is there? It can be confused to believe that couples have a right to have children because they're married. So, which means we have a right to have a child of our own. Uh, the child that exists has a right to life, but a right per se to have children is not a right in and of itself. So
Hmm.
that's why we can't use IVF with that mentality to say, well, every couple has a right to have children, so IVF should be available. Now, as you said, the church isn't saying there aren't other ways. There are other ways. There are doctors out there who are using hormonal therapy and studying the fertility cycles of women and using that research to help married couples, uh, conceive.
Hmm.
And that's been successful. Dr. Thomas Hilgers comes to mind in the St. Paul VI Institute that I think is out in Colorado, I believe. But Dr. Thomas Hilgers, several decades ago, uncovered a lot of real scientific data using, I think, hormones and other ways to study the fertility of a woman, to use that in such a way to help women regulate their cycles, because a lot of women, unfortunately, are even using birth control, which wreaks havoc on fertility for a woman, and so that can also contribute to later sterility and fertility. So there is a lot of good going on in this realm. So it's not as if there's no hope. It just means we can't use uh, the immoral means to try and achieve a good end.
Yeah, we'll outline what the article says based on Dona Vitae, why it's immoral in specific terms. This article does say that most Catholics are not even aware of the church's teaching on IVF.
Sure.
If a couple is unaware that the procedure is immoral, they are not subjectively guilty of sin. Children conceived through IVF are children of God, and they're loved by their parents as they should be. Like all children, regardless of the circumstances of their conception and birth, they should be loved, cherished, and cared for. But why exactly is IVF immoral? In vitro fertilization brings about new life in a petri dish.
Hmm.
Child engendered through IVF are sometimes known as test tube babies. Several eggs are aspirated from the woman's ovary after she has taken a fertility drug, which causes a number of eggs to mature at the same time. Semen is collected from the man, and usually through masturbation. And then the egg and the sperm are joined in a glass dish. So that's the first reason. It's the petri dish, as we've already said, outside the marriage act. Um, Obviously, IVF eliminates the marriage act as the means of achieving pregnancy instead of helping it achieve this natural end. Again, we're not the church is for helping fertility, but not causing it outside the marriage act. Um, Even if the egg and sperm come from the husband and the wife, serious moral problems arise. Invariably, several embryos are brought into existence. Only those which show the greatest promise of growing to term are implanted in the womb. The others are simply discarded or used for experiments. This is a terrible offense against human life. While a little baby may ultimately be born because of this procedure, other lives are usually snuffed out in the process. So basically, that's abortion, isn't it?
Right. That's correct.
So the IVF is just a flip side of the same abortive coin.
Right. Sure. Because you're aborting several children all at once from one one couple or one attempt to bring an embryo to term. So you're making, and then the unfortunate the evil underlying that also is the intent of we're going to make many embryos, knowing we're not going to use them all. So that it's just a total disregard for the dignity of the human person. The Just materialistic view of that, and plus the way in which it promotes this idea that couples can sort of choose their children and choose their donor and just get really almost like up to or menu you get a menu together of what we want our child to be, precisely by who the donor is and eye color, hair color, and genetics, and let's pay the money, right? Lots of money involved in this as well, which doesn't make it immoral. It's just very expensive, so people don't even realize how expensive it is. But
Right.
that is nothing
I'm looking at the numbers while
in
you're
carried,
speaking.
yeah, nothing it pales in comparison to what's happening to little children, little embryos that are being just destroyed, just trashed. Basically, they're just waste.
And,
And but the other thing, I think there's another area in one of those articles we had spoken about, though, that talks about how isn't there a needle that's injected
well,
into
yes,
the, yeah.
there's a situation where there's a needle that's injected into the heart of one of the embryos
Hmm.
that terminates
Right.
the life of that embryo.
So I think people probably don't know that. Was it that far along in the development that there can be heartbeat? Well, yes.
Sure. And I think it just raises issues regarding eugenics. I mean, because at this point, you are the mother and the father. You almost become kind of the consumers here.
Hmm.
We're shopping for a child, and then you are selecting, or medical science is selecting which one is defective. And if that's defective, we don't want that, and we will eliminate that. And so that way, we're kind of manufacturing a child.
Right. Exactly. And that's what I was getting at with it just becoming just this materialistic consumerism. So yeah, absolutely not at all what the goods of marriage would point to.
Yeah. So human beings bear the image and likeness of God. They are to be reverenced as sacred. Never are they to be used as a means to an end, not even to satisfy the deepest wishes of an infertile couple. Husbands and wives make love, they do not make babies. The marital act is not, we just use this word, the marital act is not a manufacturing process, and children are not products. Like the Son of God Himself, we are the kinds of beings who are begotten, not made, and therefore of equal status and dignity with our parents. In IVF, children are engendered through a technical process subject to quality control and eliminated if found defective. Um, these children are thoroughly subjected to the arbitrary choices of those bringing them into being. In the words of Donum Vitae, the connection between in vitro fertilization and the voluntary destruction of human embryos occurs too often. This is significant. Through these procedures, with apparently contrary purposes, life and death are subjected to the decision of man, who thus sets himself up as the giver of life and death by decree. The document speaks of the right of every person to be conceived and to be born within marriage and from marriage. And I think one of the things that we don't often consider in this topic is really the right of the child.
Correct.
And every child has the right to be conceived in his mother's or her mother's womb and not necessarily in a lab. And I don't think, and this may not be across the board, but there may be some situations where the person has some psychological
Sure. Like,
effect on that. That
you
I was made.
were made in a petri dish. You were grown
Yes,
in a lab for a while. I mean, sure. I don't know what that would do to me to learn that. It's just
You would be
I've
glad to be alive. Yes,
right,
sure,
sure.
sure, but there has to be some
How can you
psychological
not
burden with
feel
that.
like a laboratory experiment when you hear that reality? So, you sure it's every level of the human person is affected by IVF in that regard, I would say.
Yes. In the most recent article, after the test, the embryos are graded in accordance with their quality. Those that are deemed healthiest are the ones that are chosen for initial implantation. Um, Essentially, what IVF is trying to do is sell a product, and anything other than a healthy baby, they are eliminated through a quality control process. And again, this goes to Pope Francis's technocratic paradigm. That technology has shaped our imagination and it has reduced everything into commodity over which we should have some kind of mastery. Like technology gives us the illusion of mastery over everything, including the generation of life. That technology is good, but it can get out of hand very quickly if we do not think of it in virtuous ways.
Well, I think the effect of the technocratic paradigm would also be the added this disposable attitude that all of technology, though it purports to give us the solutions to every problem imaginable, then just becomes obsolete anyway, and something newer models will just be emerging. So the other things we just dispose of. I mean, you look at how long you've had your recent smartphone, any of
Right.
us, right? Okay, sure, a few years maybe, and then it'll be, where will it go? I don't know, but we just basically uh, kick it back to the store, and maybe they reuse it or reprogram it for something, but probably not as much. And it just keeps going through everything almost like Kleenex. Just
Mhm.
everything's disposable. So then everybody becomes disposable. And if you live in a culture that approves of IVF, it just everyone's disposable. Everyone's a means to an end. I can step over you, walk all over you. You're an object, not a person. You're in my way to the goal of what you want to achieve. So you either move over
Right.
or be destroyed. So there is a lot of that mentality, even with relationships and marriages. And Saint Paul the Sixth, mentioned in his encyclical Humanae Vitae, which said the church would uphold its teachings on marriage and family, and that contraception within marriage, artificial contraception, would be is immoral and is gravely sinful and has no place in the covenant of marriage. That's all that Humanae Vitae spoke about. It didn't speak about contraception across the board, saying, well, what about couples who aren't married? Well, they shouldn't be having any sexual unions. They're not married. So why are you asking about contraception? But contraception is comes onto the stage and is ineffective at preventing conception. And so births occur or pregnancies occur.
Mhm.
And then you need a quote solution for that. There comes abortion. We didn't plan on having a child. So
Correct. Yes,
so that
yes,
so
a
that
child
yeah,
becomes kind of a choice.
right. So that becomes that continues in our culture. So then in that, and then if I don't have to, if a child can be eliminated, then well, the consequences of my infidelity of sleeping around can be avoided,
Sure.
which is why contraception keeps being used in many cases, right? Because there's infidelity happening, or there's people don't want children, and they avoid that, so they use contraception. So children are conceived, then what?
Sure.
So they're all connected. So IVF just feeds this disposable mentality of children that we're God and we govern life. No, we serve and protect life. I mean, we're stewards, because no one, and that doesn't matter what one can do with life. You can't bring yourself into being. You can't just, well, how are you here? Well, I just willed myself into being.
Right.
Even if you were created in an isolated lab and there was no person around that involved in your conception other than the lab procedure, no mother or father to be known, just have the egg and the sperm, and here we go. But you did not bring yourself into being. So even you needed a person, somebody had to be there to. So, but then I think that creates just the really crazy immoral situation then of just, well, who's conducting the conception would be, I suppose, the laboratory personnel, which is, I mean, that's just
Who have a
totally
profit motive, who have a profit motive to do
sterile in
this.
the way of uh, just it seems so cold and isolated.
Uh, yes. It reminds me of something G.K. Chesterton. I won't get his words exactly right, but he says that, we reject Calvinism, which was the theology that God predetermines everything. And we reject that kind of understanding that, God would predetermine everything. But yet, by means of science, we have become the Calvinists.
Hmm.
We have made ourselves the very Calvinistic God that we abhor.
Hmm.
We are determining life,
Sure.
who gets to live, who gets to die. We even want to kind of make the child fashionable to our interest, like
It's a good
creating this life. I
analogy.
mean,
Yeah.
yes, I mean
Right.
it's a secular form of Calvinistic
Right.
thinking.
Because that petri dish, that lab is your world, quote, and
Yes,
you're God of the whole thing. Well,
and you're determining
we'll
who
let
lives and
these
who
live
dies.
and who doesn't. And I mean, what the great sin of Pharaoh in Exodus
Right,
of the Hebrew people growing too many. He just said, throw every boy born unto the Hebrew women into the river, let the girls live. I mean, there's no difference other than the length of development of the child of that horrific sin of disposing of literally the children.
right. And I think this technology. I mean, we've talked about it, how a man and woman, they come together in the conjugal act, even unmarried. They conceive a child. Suddenly, this is a problem because we did not plan for this. I think we have underestimated how much birth control has shaped our thinking on sexuality and the production of children.
Of
But
course,
this technology as well has rendered marriage unnecessary as well. I mean, there was a time where, well, you got to be married. You're going to have children. You need to be married. But now marriage is an option because a couple can just buy the child if they want to
right?
do undergo this
Yes,
IVF procedure.
exactly. I mean, and also it also makes parenting kind of optional in a sense. I mean, I suppose uh, so parenting can just be shifted around. Like we'll have this embryo from this couple, that's not the couple,
Hmm.
and they'll take that embryo and implant that in the woman, right? Because you said you only gave the example of, well, even if it's the husband and wife using their own embryo or using their own sperm and egg. I mean, people are assuming that's what's happening. No, that's not what's happening in a lot of cases. You're quote buying an embryo, I suppose, right? You're buying a little a baby in its smallest form and implanting that in the womb of another woman. In many cases, it's not the mother's egg, it's not the father's sperm in that marital union, but so the argument there would be because it wasn't that like kind of like an adoption.
Hmm.
So, but again, the church has been really, I think, wrestled with that. I don't know that I've seen any pronouncements definitively on that, but it seems that the answer is what about these other embryos that are frozen, or these children that are not allowed to develop? What would one say? Which is a good. I'm sure there'd be some. There have been. I'm sure papers and theological debates on that issue.
Hmm.
So, but it seems to me that if you say, well, then it's okay to have embryos adopted
Hmm.
that have products of quote products uh, of IVF, then that's okay. But then you made IVF have a good. So even though it's evil, but looks at least we can have at least it will create more embryos for more couples. But then you're just doing the same. You're just sort of re-promoting the IVF again. You're saying, well, we're helping 10 couples instead of one.
Hmm.
Or we won't destroy any more embryos. We'll make sure that they're adopted out. But it I think there's no way around getting out of that manufacturing mentality. And the only case that could be really, maybe in my opinion, and I'm not a moral theologian, and certainly not in this ethics realm, bioethics as it were, but if there was some kind of a isolated incident where there was sort of like a rescue mission for this conglomerate of embryos that were frozen, and it was a decision to say, yes, these can be, let's save them and you allow them to have life, and then that would be the end of it.
Hmm.
Because anything else after this is this moment of rescue would be casualties. of a very twisted and immoral procedure.
Well, despite the exorbitant, this is from the article from the National Catholic Register, despite the exorbitant destruction of human life integral to the IVF process, the public and its elected officials treat the subject very differently than they do the deaths caused by abortion. After the Alabama Supreme Court ruling, which forced some IVF clinics to suspend services, the court received backlash from Democrats and Republicans. In Alabama, the Republican led legislature adopted a law to shield IVF clinics from civil or criminal liability, which self identified pro life Governor Kay Ivey immediately signed. Ivey and other Republicans who supported the bill claimed that protecting IVF is pro life.
Oh my.
Michael New, a professor of social research at the Catholic University of America and pro life activist, told CNA that IVF is a thorny issue for us politically. He said that no one could get elected on banning IVF, but if you can't ban something, at least stop promoting it. It's wrong, New said, to create embryos without the intent of seeing that they are carried to term. So, I mean, now we're in the politics of all of this, and I'm just going to throw this out there. I mean, is it? We know what the Democratic Party stands for, and now we've got members of the Republican Party now supporting at least the protection of IVF, as you've seen here. Um, the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party says that he supports IVF. Is it possible to say, just in principle, Father, and this is a question I'm just throwing at you, that now we have two abortion candidates?
Sure, because we've just said IVF involves the destruction of embryos of children, so that's abortion. We terminate the life of an embryo, which is a human being, right? I mean, even with uh, the Plan B pill, women taking that, I mean, that's an abortive measure. Uh, you're expelling the child that may have been able to grow in the womb immediately, and then there's that fallout plan, as it were, to so if the if abortion is connected to the life in the womb directly, if that's how we're agreeing to, if that's the universal term, I suppose, is a determination of a life of an unborn child. But then an embryo is an unborn child.
So what do
So
we
I
do?
don't know I don't know how you're terminating the life of an embryo, a child in IVF. So, I mean, I'm not sure how you couldn't call that abortion as well. It's not the typical way we think about it. It doesn't have the grotesque. Well, it does on some level if they're injecting a needle into
Right,
the heart
the embryo.
of a baby.
Hmm.
So, I mean, they're babies. All of it, all this to
These are
say that they're
children.
all babies. So they're just different stages of development. So at conception, there's a baby, and that's the Catholic mind, and really science. Um, Science gives us the foundation to say that with great vigor,
So,
because something is there that was not there before. The cellular development happens on the level of creating a person. There's
mhm.
intentionality there. There's DNA. There's order. There's structure coming. It's all the child is the human person is developing at conception. Just sets off a chain reaction of cellular growth and organs and everything. It just
It is development.
and I don't know when the day the heartbeat is known, but I think it's less than I think it's just less than a month, 24 days or
Yep.
so.
It is a living thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, but it's alive before there's a heartbeat.
But
So I
what do
mean,
we
that's
do? What do we do as Catholics? And I know I'm throwing all these like really unanswerable questions on you, but how then, as Catholics in this election year, supposed to tease through this and think through this?
you have to go back again to I say policies because frankly, maybe the candidates on both sides will be unliked by voters. Maybe no one's happy with either choice. Don't like them as individuals. Don't like whatever. But if it comes down to two individuals to choose from, then you have to just look at which policies are coming, and then using conscience and Catholic teaching to guide. Hopefully, the bishops will guide us in this situation. But certainly, the church, the bishops are going to stand up against any promotion of IVF without doubt. So if a candidate stands on an opinion that IVF should be allowed, but doesn't promise to do anything about it,
Mhm.
just says, "Well, I don't think Alabama made that was wrong." Okay, that's an opinion that worries some, because what does that mean? You're gonna push through federal funding, and then when you start hearing that language, or I'm going to ask to enshrine that this be protected under reproductive rights, which is the same language you're trying to do with abortion. So if you start talking like that, then I say, well, I don't know, maybe it's a draw. I say, well, neither one. No, if either one of them's just trying two sides of the same coin here, life in the womb, to protect life in the womb, and one says destroy life in the womb, but then the other one says, well, if the life's not in the womb, it's okay to
Right, and
destroy it.
according to this article in the
So
National
it's like,
Catholic
well,
Register, more
the
more
baby's the
deaths happen
baby.
in IVF than they
Sure.
do in the
Yeah,
womb.
of course. If you did, yep, that would be an easy argument to make. Hmm.
Well, the church has great compassion for those who suffer from infertility out of love for all human life and respect for the integrity of marital relations. However, the church teaches that some means of trying to achieve pregnancy are just not licit. Some of these means actually involve the taking of an innocent human life or treating human life as a means toward an end or a manufactured product. In America, we have a tendency to think that we can solve all problems with the right technology.
That's a
That's Pope Francis's thesis as well, but this was written long before Pope
but
Francis's
that's a
Laudato
technocratic
Si.
paradigm,
That's the
right? So just
technocratic
repeat
paradigm.
that line so people let
In
that sink
America, we
in.
have a tendency to think that we can solve all problems with the right technology. But children are not engendered by technology or produced by an industry. Children should arise from an act of love between a husband and wife in cooperation with God. No human being can create the image of God. That is why we say that human beings procreate with God. Engendering children is a cooperative act among husband, wife, and God Himself. Children, in the final analysis, should be begotten and not made.
Amen.
Yeah, and I mean that's it's good to think these things through because we want
We
to
need to
think
think
with
it
the
through.
mind of the
We
church.
need
We've
to think
talked
it
about
through.
that
Yeah,
as
we need to
well.
think it through. We need to look at what this would be a time to say, well, start studying,
Yeah, yeah.
studying up, and getting what's the church saying? Read Donum Vitae. Read more magisterial teachings on what the church.
Read Laudato Si, chapter 3. If you're not going to read the whole thing, chapter 3 is when the Pope talks about the technocratic paradigm.
Mhm, sure.
And
Again, not a new idea.
not a new idea.
Right.
He's just bringing it to the fore as well. Well, thank you, Father, for helping us think through this. I hope our listeners bore fruit. Found it to be a fruitful conversation. Again, if you want to read the article that was most recently published, that's going to be in the National Catholic Register. You can still see it online now. The article from the USCCB website, which has some age to it, about 20 years old, 25 years old. All you have to do is just search IVF and USCCB. It'll come right up. And it's very clear. It's a very good article as well to help us think again with the mind of the church. On behalf of
Thanks,
Father
Shane.
Rossi, thank you. And everybody, if you want more information about our parish, please visit our website at stmccg.org. Week and a half of Lent left. No, 2 weeks of Lent left.
Yes,
We can do this
with God's grace.
with God's grace. Thank you, everybody. God bless you. And remember, stay on the bark of Peter.